When my wife was 29 years old, she scheduled her second ever gynecologist appointment, and I was 35. Typically, she would text me incessantly and inform me of her whereabouts, but on this particular day, she did not respond to any of my messages until 3 hours after her appointment. Upon my return from work, I noticed that she was avoiding eye contact and keeping herself occupied by doing laundry. I managed to confront her and inquire about her unusual behavior. She immediately burst into tears and revealed that she felt uneasy during her doctor's visit earlier that day. I inquired further, and my wife disclosed that during her gynecologist appointment, the doctor had strapped her feet down in the stirrups and engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with her. Upon hearing this, I was overcome with rage and began pacing and yelling. I formulated a plan to take legal action against the doctor. However, my wife hesitated before, revealing that something else had occurred. The doctor had also engaged in sexual intercourse with her while she was restrained on the table. Despite her apparent distress, I sensed that she was not completely upset and was trying to mask her true emotions. I was deeply saddened by my wife's revelation, but I chose to hide my perception of her facade. Perhaps it was because I didn't want to accuse her of willingly engaging in a sexual relationship with her doctor. Instead, I suggested that we take legal action against him for malpractice. When I brought up the idea, my wife seemed embarrassed and uneasy. She insisted that we didn't need to pursue this route and that she simply wouldn't return to that doctor. I expressed my disagreement and stressed that he needed to be held accountable for his actions. What if he had done this to other women? My wife appeared dumbfounded by my question and was at a loss for words. The following day, I was surprised to find my wife preparing to go to work as usual. However, I chose to stay home and began searching for a lawyer to handle our case. Just as I was about to make a call, I noticed that my wife's iPad was left unattended and curiosity got the best of me. Upon checking it, I discovered a notification from someone labeled as L on her WhatsApp. They had arranged to meet at an out-of-town location during the last hour of her workday. My wife had replied with a winking face and confirmed that she could leave work early. When the person asked if she had told anyone about the previous day's events, she swore that she had not. This discovery frightened me to the core. I immediately sensed that my wife was keeping something from me after discovering her suspicious WhatsApp messages. After checking the time, I realized that I had several hours before her planned meeting. I decided to seek the advice of a divorce lawyer regarding the matter and discussed what my best course of action might be given the circumstances. He agreed that her behavior was peculiar and recommended that I gather evidence to confirm my suspicions. While he suggested hiring a private investigator, I decided to take matters into my own hands and head to the meeting location myself. Along the way, I purchased a GPS tracker. My heart was pounding as I waited nervously in my car parked outside a high-end restaurant. It was likely that my wife and her companion had chosen the fancy restaurant to avoid being recognized. When I arrived, I spotted my wife sitting at a table for two near the front window, looking anxious. As I waited in my car, my emotions overwhelmed me, and I found myself shedding tears. A wealthy-looking man in a nice car arrived shortly after and entered the restaurant to join my wife at the table. After composing myself, I stepped out of the car and discreetly attached the GPS tracker to my wife's vehicle. While keeping a safe distance, I managed to take pictures of them conversing and eating carefree at the table, hiding behind a nearby car. Once they got into their respective cars, I waited in mine until my wife and the other man began driving. I followed them from a safe distance to a hotel, circling around to the other side to avoid detection. Unsure of how long to wait before approaching, I paced outside the entrance for a moment. Finally, I positioned myself by the automatic doors and managed to snap a clear photo of them at the check-in counter without tripping the motion sensor. The sight made me sick to my stomach, and I had to resist the overwhelming urge to confront the man in that moment. I parked my car in the front parking lot, far from the hotel entrance. After zooming in on my camera, I placed it on the dashboard, pointing it directly at the entrance. I began recording 10 minutes later, and soon after, my wife and her lover emerged hand in hand. They exchanged a goodbye kiss before getting into their respective cars, which I captured along with screenshots of their incriminating conversation. With enough proof of their affair, I filed for divorce and returned home before my wife. Upon her arrival, she greeted me with the same warmth as always, completely oblivious to the truth. In response, I thrust the divorce papers in her face. She gasped and demanded to know what was going on. I informed her that it was I who deserved answers, and that I had evidence of her infidelity. Her face drained of color as she asked me what I was talking about. I refused to reveal the details of my knowledge, instead insisting that she tell me the truth. Though she tried to feign ignorance, her inability to make eye contact or speak above a whisper gave away her guilt completely. I threatened to post the picture of her and the doctor on social media if she didn't confess. As she began to panic, I recorded our conversation. She refused to believe that I had a picture and stared at me in disbelief, but I assured her that I did and showed it to her on the camera. She tried to grab it from me, leading to a brief struggle. Ultimately, I managed to retrieve the evidence and locked myself in the bedroom with it. After she stopped screaming and pounding on the door, I demanded that she sign the divorce papers and leave the house. I warned her that unless she listened to me, I would post the evidence I had. After a few minutes of loud protesting, she left the room. Uncertain of her whereabouts, I decided to share the proof on her social media account. As she faced severe online criticism, she scrambled to find a place to stay. Over the next several months, she bounced between various locations, including abandoned buildings, while we battled it out in court. Meanwhile, her lover's medical license was revoked, and he relocated. Without any witnesses, he escaped any criminal charges. My former partner remains without a home, regretful for the brief affair that caused her to lose everything. Despite any temptation to help her, I have instead sought counseling and pursued new hobbies. I have decided to share my experience because I want others to know that they are not alone in these kinds of situations and that things can and do improve. Great work, Op. My response: I am extremely proud of you for how you dealt with the situation. Not only did justice catch up with your unfaithful partner, but with her lover as well. Up. Please continue to take the necessary time to heal from this experience. Remember that things will eventually look up for you. Moving on to our second story for today, I would like to express my gratitude for this community, which has been a great source of help and support. I would like to share a shortened version of my story. My ex-wife and I were together for 6 years before we tied the knot in June 2021. During the pandemic, despite the challenges, we managed to have a beautiful wedding, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. After a few months had passed, my wife underwent a significant change. While I continued to work from home, she chose to go to the office regularly, as she was employed by a large company. Although longer work hours were typical for her job, she began to neglect our quality time together on weekends and spent a lot of time with her horse. Additionally, she started to belittle my accomplishments and claimed that I was no longer ambitious, despite my success at work. Many people warned that the first year of marriage can be a challenge, so I made an effort to take my wife on regular date nights to reignite our relationship. However, despite my efforts, she remained aloof and critical, causing a significant blow to my self-esteem. I agonized over what I might have done to cause her behavior and feelings, but I couldn't find any reasonable explanation. As a result, I struggled to sleep and became consumed with the fear of losing my wife to another person. These months were incredibly difficult for me because I never imagined that I could lose the person I married so soon after our wedding. I convinced myself that the reason for my wife's behavior was the stress of her job. In an effort to avoid worsening our issues, I chose to ignore the negative thoughts and suppress them. Unbeknownst to me, my wife was actually gaslighting me throughout this time. Despite my suspicions, I planned a romantic weekend by the beach to try and rekindle our relationship. Unfortunately, instead of improving things, her contempt for me only grew stronger. On the day of our dinner, I expressed my love for her, but she did not reciprocate. Later that same evening, my wife asked me to take an SFB photo of her in a bubble bath. When I expressed concern that the photo might be too risky for social media, she brushed it off, saying it wasn't intended for that purpose. Although we had been physically intimate throughout our marriage, my wife refused to be intimate with me during the trip. This behavior only fueled my suspicions, and I eventually confronted her about it, demanding that she be truthful with me. At first, she denied everything, but I persisted, even though I didn't have any concrete proof. Eventually, she came clean and confessed. During our confrontation, my wife finally admitted to having an affair with her boss for several months. She also revealed that he had been pressuring her to leave me. The news triggered a panic attack, something I had never experienced before. Once I had calmed down, I realized how foolish my wife was for falling for his lies. I told her that I planned to inform his wife about the affair. She responded by saying that the wife would find out, but I wouldn't be the one to tell her. This response was a clear indication that my ex-wife had convinced herself that she would run away with her boss. It was a sick and manipulative behavior that made me realize that the person I had married was not who I thought she was. After my wife admitted to having an affair with her boss, she took control of the situation. She changed my flight that night, sent me to my parents' house, and informed me that she would mail me some boxes of my clothes. As soon as I arrived at the airport, I contacted the boss's wife via social media, and things spiraled out of control from there. It turned out that the boss never had any intention of leaving his family. In an attempt to salvage his marriage, he distanced himself from my ex-wife as quickly as possible. HR had to get involved, and my ex-wife quickly gained a reputation around her office. Despite my ex-wife's tearful pleas for reconciliation, I made it clear that her infidelity had sealed the fate of our marriage. In the aftermath of the divorce, I was determined to move forward and find happiness. Thankfully, things have turned out well for me. I now reside near some of my closest friends, have met a wonderful new partner, and have landed a great job in California. Through this experience, I have learned to value and love myself again. I have come to understand that my ex-wife's negative opinions of me during our marriage do not define my worth as a person. Ultimately, success has been the best form of revenge, and I am grateful for the new life I have built. I am much happier now that she's no longer in my life, and although I sometimes feel sad about what happened, I am grateful that I found out before we had children. I want to apologize to you, Opie, for the hurt that your wife's actions have caused you. It's satisfying to see karma catch up with cheaters who become delusional and believe their affair will last forever. In this situation, your wife foolishly believed that her boss would abandon his wife for her and that they would live happily ever after. It was like a fairy tale in her mind. However, I'm relieved to know that she eventually came back to reality and must now face the consequences of her actions for the rest of her life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened.